Don't talk to him. He can't hear you anyway, the senior nurse whispered. But Lily Harper kept turning the page as if the silence in the room was listening back, her voice soft but steady, threading through the quiet like it belonged there, like it mattered, because for reasons she couldn't explain, she refused to believe that a man could be this present and still be completely gone. The private suite on the top floor of Westbridge Medical Center didn't feel like a hospital room. It felt like a museum of stillness, soft lighting, polished floors, machines humming in perfect rhythm. And at the center of it all lay Ethan Hayes, 32, billionaire, CEO, the kind of man whose name used to move markets, now reduced to a motionless figure beneath crisp white sheets, his chest rising and falling in slow, measured breaths, his face calm in a way that didn't feel peaceful, just distant. Lily adjusted the edge of the blanket with careful hands, the same way she had done every morning for the past 3 weeks, her worn sneakers squeaking faintly against the spotless floor as she crossed back to the chair beside his bed, the chair no one else ever used, because no one else stayed long enough. She opened the paperback in her lap, the spine cracked, pages softened from use, a small, ordinary book that looked almost out of place in a room filled with quiet luxury, and she smiled faintly, more to herself than to him. Okay, where were we? She murmured, as if he had been the one waiting for her to continue, as if he had missed something. Outside the floor-to-ceiling window, the city stretched wide and bright, traffic inching along in neat lines, people moving with purpose, unaware that inside this room, time felt different, slower, suspended. Lily began to read again, her voice low, natural, unforced, not performing, just sharing, the way someone would read to a friend on a quiet afternoon. And as the words filled the space, something shifted, not in a dramatic way, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough that the air felt less empty. She leaned back slightly, glancing at Ethan's face, searching for something, anything, a flicker, a reaction, a sign that her words weren't disappearing into nothing. But there was only stillness, the same stillness that had greeted every doctor, every specialist, every expensive treatment his family had paid for without hesitation, because money had never been the problem, but connection. That was something no one had figured out how to buy. Lily swallowed quietly and kept reading, her fingers brushing lightly over the edge of the page as she turned it, a small habit she didn't realize she had, her voice softening when the story grew tender, lifting slightly when the characters laughed, like she was carrying both sides of the conversation. You know, she said after a moment, breaking from the text, her tone thoughtful, almost shy. I don't actually know if you like stories like this, but I figured it's better than silence. She let out a small breath, almost a laugh. I don't think anyone should have to sit in silence this long. And for a second, just a second, her eyes lingered on his hand resting beside him, pale against the sheet, unmoving. But something in her chest tightened like she was waiting for it to do something unexpected. The monitor beside the bed continued its steady rhythm, beeping softly, unchanged, predictable. But Lily didn't look away, not yet, because somewhere between the lines she had read and the quiet she refused to accept, a feeling had begun to take root, fragile but stubborn, the kind that didn't need proof to exist, the kind that whispered, "What if he can hear you? What if he's been listening this whole time?" She exhaled slowly, shook her head at herself, and turned back to the book, her voice returning, gentle, unwavering. "Let's keep going," she said, as if the story mattered, as if he mattered, as if this moment, this quiet, ordinary moment, was leading somewhere neither of them could see yet. By the fourth morning, Lily no longer checked the chart first. She checked him, the same quiet habit forming without permission, as if somewhere along the way this had stopped being a job and started becoming something she could not quite name. She slipped into the room just after 7:10 a.m., a paper cup of lukewarm coffee in one hand and the worn paperback tucked under her arm, her hair pulled back in a loose tie that had already started to slip, and for a brief second she paused at the doorway, watching the steady rise and fall of Ethan's chest like she was making sure the world was still working the way it should. "Good morning," she said softly as she stepped inside, closing the door behind her with care, even though no one had told her she needed to be quiet. It just felt right, like loudness did not belong here. She set the coffee down, adjusted the blinds slightly to let in a thin line of sunlight that stretched across the floor and stopped just short of the bed. And then she moved closer, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the monitor as she leaned in, studying his face again. The same strong features everyone talked about in the news, now softened by stillness. Almost peaceful if you did not look too long. "You missed a really good part yesterday," she murmured, pulling the chair closer and sitting down, her voice carrying that gentle rhythm she had settled into, somewhere between conversation and confession. The main character finally told the truth. "Took him long enough," she added with a faint smile. Flipping open the book to the page she had marked with a folded corner, she began to read, her voice steady. But today there was something else beneath it, a quiet determination, like she was not just filling silence anymore. She was trying to reach through it. Outside, the city moved faster now, horns faint in the distance, people rushing through their mornings. But inside the room, time slowed again, anchored to the cadence of her voice. A few minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe more. Lily lost track the way she always did when she read. And then it happened again. So small she almost missed it. A slight change in the rhythm of the monitor. Not alarming, not sharp, just different. Her eyes lifted from the page, her voice faltering for half a second before she forced herself to keep going, not wanting to break whatever invisible thread had formed. He said he was afraid of losing her. She read, more quietly now, her gaze shifting between the words and Ethan's face. Her heart began to beat a little faster, not from fear, but from something closer to hope, cautious and fragile. She leaned forward slightly, lowering the book, watching his hand again, the same hand that had not moved in weeks. And there it was, barely there, a subtle twitch of his index finger against the sheet, so faint it could have been dismissed as nothing. But Lily did not dismiss it. She froze, her breath catching as she stared, waiting for it to happen again. "Ethan," she whispered, the name feeling strange on her tongue, like she was crossing a line she had not been invited to cross. But she said it anyway, softer this time. "Ethan, can you hear me?" The room held its breath with her, the machines continuing their steady hum, indifferent to the moment. And for a second nothing changed, the silence pressing in again, familiar and heavy. Lily swallowed, her eyes stinging slightly, unsure if she had imagined it, if she had wanted it so badly that her mind had filled in the gap. And she almost laughed at herself, a quiet, shaky exhale as she looked back down at the book. "Okay, maybe I am getting ahead of myself," she murmured, more to herself than to him. But she did not close the book, she did not leave. Instead, she turned the page with careful fingers and kept reading, her voice a little softer now, a little more careful, like she was protecting something fragile that had not fully revealed itself yet. And though the room looked the same as it always had, something had shifted, just enough that Lily could not ignore it anymore, just enough that the silence no longer felt empty, but waiting. That night, long after her shift was supposed to end, Lily found herself still sitting in the same chair, the book resting open in her lap, but unread, her eyes drifting back again and again to Ethan's hand like she was trying to memorize the exact place where it had moved. Because once you see something like that, even the smallest movement, you cannot unsee it, you cannot go back to believing there is nothing there. The hallway outside had quieted, the usual rhythm of carts and footsteps, fading into a distant hush, and the soft glow of the room lights cast gentle shadows across the floor, making everything feel suspended, almost unreal. Lily leaned forward slightly, her elbows resting on her knees, her fingers loosely holding the edge of the book, and she exhaled slowly, steadying herself. "Okay. If that was real," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the hum of the machines, "then you have to do it again." Her eyes lifted to his face, searching, hopeful but careful, like she did not want to scare the moment away by expecting too much. For a long second, nothing changed. The same stillness settling back into place, familiar and heavy, and Lily almost shook her head at herself, almost laughed again, but she stopped, because something inside her refused to let it go, refused to file it away as imagination. She reached out, hesitating only briefly before placing her hand gently over his, the contact light, respectful, her skin warm against his cooler fingers, and she swallowed. her voice softer now. "Ethan, if you can hear me, you are not alone." The words felt simple, almost too simple, but they carried something real, something she meant more than anything she had read aloud. The monitor beside him continued its steady rhythm, but Lily noticed it again, that subtle shift, not loud, not urgent, just a slight change in pace, as if something inside him was responding in its own quiet way. Her breath caught, her grip tightening just a fraction, not enough to be forceful, just enough to hold on. And she leaned closer, her voice trembling now with something she could not hide. "I saw your hand move earlier. I know that was you." She paused, searching his face again, willing him to meet her halfway, even just a little. "You do not have to wake up all at once. Just stay with me." The room seemed to lean into her words, the silence no longer empty but full, waiting, and then it happened again, clearer this time. His index finger shifted beneath hers, a small, deliberate movement that sent a sharp rush of disbelief through her chest, her eyes widening as she stared, frozen between shock and something dangerously close to joy. "Ethan," she breathed, the name no longer uncertain, no longer borrowed, but real, grounded, and for a moment she forgot everything else, forgot the rules, the protocols, the distance she was supposed to keep, because this was not nothing, this was not random. This was connection breaking through something that had seemed impossible. She let out a soft, unsteady laugh, tears blurring her vision as she shook her head slightly. Okay, I am not crazy," she whispered, almost to herself, but she did not pull her hand away. She stayed exactly where she was, holding onto that fragile proof like it might disappear. If she let go, outside, the city lights flickered against the window, distant and unaware. But inside the room, something had shifted in a way that could not be undone, something small but undeniable, and Lily knew, with a certainty she had not felt before, that whatever silence had held Ethan Hayes captive, it was starting to break. The next morning, Lily did not rush into the room the way she usually did. She paused just outside the door, her hand hovering over the handle as if crossing that threshold now meant something different. Because what had happened the night before was not something she could explain away, not something she could ignore, and for the first time since she had been assigned to this case, she felt nervous. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself, then pushed the door open, the soft click echoing faintly in the quiet room as she stepped inside, her eyes immediately finding him, exactly where he had been, still, composed, unchanged to anyone else who might walk in, but not to her, not anymore. "Good morning," she said gently, her voice carrying a hint of something new, something cautious but hopeful, as she moved closer, setting her bag down and pulling the chair into its familiar place beside his bed. She studied his face for a moment, searching for any sign that the night had left something behind, any trace that he was still somewhere beneath the silence. And though there was no obvious change, no open eyes or spoken words, she felt it, that quiet presence, like a door that had been locked was now slightly open. She reached for his hand again, slower this time, more intentional, her fingers resting lightly over his. "I am going to read to you again," she said, almost as if she was asking permission, her thumb brushing gently against his knuckle. "But this time, you have to stay with me, okay?" The words were soft, but there was a quiet determination beneath them, a promise she did not fully realize she was making. She opened the book, flipping to the marked page, but before she began, she hesitated, her eyes drifting back to him. "Actually, I want to try something different today," she murmured, closing the book halfway, her thoughts shifting, evolving, because something inside her told her that maybe it was not just the story that mattered, maybe it was the truth behind it. She leaned back slightly, her voice lowering, more personal now, less practiced. "When I was 10, my dad used to read to me every night," she began, her gaze softening as she spoke. "Same chair, same lamp, same book, over and over again, even when I pretended I was too old for it." A small smile touched her lips, fleeting but real. "I think he knew I needed it more than I wanted to admit." She glanced at Ethan again, searching, waiting, as if inviting him into the memory. He said stories were not just about the ending. They were about not feeling alone while you got there. The room held on to her words, the quiet no longer empty, but listening. and for a moment nothing changed. The same stillness stretching between them, familiar yet different, and then she felt it, subtle but unmistakable, a faint pressure beneath her fingers, his hand responding again, not just a twitch this time, but a small, deliberate shift, as if he was reaching back in the only way he could. Lily froze, her breath catching as her eyes widened, her heart pounding louder than the machines around them. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief, and something deeper, something warmer. "That is you." "I know it is." She leaned closer, her grip tightening just slightly, careful, protective, like she was holding on to something fragile but real. "You are not gone. You are still here." Her voice softened, almost breaking, but she did not pull away. She stayed, right there with him, anchored to that moment, because whatever silence had surrounded him before was no longer complete. It had cracks now, small but undeniable, and Lily realized with a quiet certainty that this was no longer just about waiting for him to wake up. This was about reaching him, and somehow, impossibly, he was already reaching back. By the end of the week, Lily no longer counted time by shifts or hours. She counted it by moments, by the subtle changes that no one else seemed to notice, the slight increase in his responsiveness, the way his fingers no longer lay completely still when she spoke, the way the silence between them felt less like absence and more like something waiting to be filled. The doctors came and went with their charts and measured tones, noting small neurological improvements, increased brain activity, cautious optimism. But to Lily, it was not data, it was connection, something she could feel in the quiet spaces between words. That afternoon, the light outside softened into a pale gold, stretching across the floor and climbing slowly toward the edge of Ethan's bed, and Lily sat beside him with the book closed in her lap, her fingers resting lightly on its worn cover as she watched him, not reading this time, just being there. "They say you are improving," she said gently, her voice calm but thoughtful. "They say your brain is responding more each day." She paused, her eyes drifting to his hand beneath hers, but they do not know why. A faint smile touched her lips, soft and almost shy. "I think I do." She leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly, as if the truth she was about to say mattered more than anything she had read before. "I think you just needed someone to stay." The room held on to her words, the quiet wrapping around them, steady and patient, and for a moment she wondered if she was saying this for him or for herself. She shifted in her chair, her thumb brushing gently across his knuckles, a small, unconscious motion she had started doing without thinking. "You know, I almost quit before they assigned me to you," she admitted, her voice softer now, more vulnerable. "Too many long nights, too many patients who never got better. It starts to feel like you are talking to walls." She let out a quiet breath, her gaze lowering briefly. "But then I met you." She looked back at him, her expression steady but warm. "And you did not answer. But you listened." The words lingered in the air, simple but heavy with meaning, and for a second nothing changed. The same stillness, the same quiet rhythm of machines, but then she felt it again, stronger this time, his fingers curling slightly beneath hers, not just a reflex, not just a flicker, but a response that held intention, that reached back. Lily froze, her breath catching as her heart skipped, her eyes widening as she tightened her hold just slightly. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling with something she could not hide anymore. Hope, real and undeniable. "That is you, right?" She leaned closer, her face inches from his, searching for anything more, any sign that he was closer to the surface. "If you can hear me, squeeze my hand again." Her voice dropped to a whisper, fragile but steady. "Just once." The room seemed to pause with her, the light resting softly across the bed, the world outside continuing without noticing, and for a long second there was nothing, the silence stretching, testing her patience, testing her belief. But Lily did not pull away. She stayed, her hand wrapped around his, her eyes locked on his face, waiting, believing, and then slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, his fingers tightened around hers. A faint but undeniable pressure that sent a rush of emotion through her chest, so strong, she had to close her eyes for a moment just to steady herself. When she opened them again, they shimmered with tears she did not try to hide, her lips parting in a soft, breathless laugh. Okay, I knew it." she whispered, her voice breaking just slightly. You are still here. She did not let go, not even for a second, because now it was no longer a question, no longer a fragile hope. It was real, and whatever distance had separated them before was shrinking, moment by moment, touch by touch, word by word, until the silence that once defined him was no longer something empty, but something alive, something listening, and finally, something beginning to answer. The first time Ethan opened his eyes, it did not happen with drama or urgency. There was no sudden movement or sharp intake of breath, just a slow, almost hesitant flutter, like someone waking from a dream they were not ready to leave. And Lily almost missed it because she had been looking down at the book in her lap, rereading the same line without realizing she had stopped turning the page. You are thinking too much, she murmured softly, half to herself, half to him. When something shifted in the corner of her vision, a change so subtle, it barely registered, and then she saw it, his lashes trembling, his eyes opening just enough to catch the light before narrowing again as if the world was too bright, too much. Lily froze, her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and instinct, her body going completely still except for the way her fingers tightened around his hand without thinking. Ethan, she whispered, her voice barely there, fragile, afraid that if she spoke too loudly the moment would disappear. His eyes moved again, slower this time, unfocused at first, drifting slightly before settling, not fully aware, not fully present, but no longer lost. And when they found her, even for a second, something inside Lily shifted in a way she could not explain, like the space between them had finally closed. She leaned closer, careful, her free hand hovering near his shoulder but not touching, unsure how much was too much, unsure what he could feel. It is okay, she said gently, her tone steady despite the way her heart was racing. You are safe. You are in the hospital. She paused, watching his eyes struggle to stay open, to hold on to the moment. You do not have to understand everything yet, she added softly, as if she was speaking him through it step by step. The monitor beside him began to change, the rhythm quickening slightly, alerting the quiet room that something was happening. But Lily did not look away from him. She stayed anchored in that moment, her gaze locked with his, as if that connection mattered more than anything else. His lips parted slightly, just a fraction, no sound coming out, but the effort was there, visible, real, and Lily felt her throat tighten as she leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. It is okay if you cannot speak yet, she said, her words calm but filled with something deeper, reassurance, belief. You already found your way back, she swallowed, her eyes softening as she searched his face, memorizing every small movement, every flicker of awareness. That is enough. His gaze lingered on her for another second, maybe two, before it drifted again, heavy with exhaustion, his eyes slowly closing as if the effort had taken everything he had to give. Lily did not move, not right away. She stayed exactly where she was, her hand still wrapped around his, her breathing uneven as she let the moment settle, let it become real. A quiet laugh escaped her, soft and unsteady, her eyes shining with tears she did not try to hide. You did it, she whispered, more to him than to herself, her voice filled with something warm, something undeniable. You actually did it. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing just slightly, but her hand never left his, because now she knew, without any doubt, that he was still there, not just listening, not just responding, but returning, piece by piece, moment by moment. And for the first time since she had walked into this room, the silence no longer felt like something she had to fight. It felt like something they had already begun to overcome together. The following days did not unfold the way Lily expected, because waking up was not the same as returning, and Ethan's brief moment of awareness did not turn into conversation or clarity. Instead, it came in fragments, seconds of eye contact, small shifts in his hand, and long stretches where he seemed to drift somewhere just beyond reach again. Still, something had changed, something permanent, and Lily felt it every time she walked into the room. The difference between waiting for a miracle and witnessing one slowly take shape. That afternoon, the room was quieter than usual, the sunlight dimmed by clouds rolling in, casting a softer gray tone across the walls, and Lily sat beside him with the book closed again, her attention focused entirely on him, because now every moment mattered in a way it had not before. "You opened your eyes yesterday," she said gently, her voice calm but filled with quiet wonder, as if she still could not fully believe it. "And you looked right at me." She smiled faintly, her fingers resting lightly over his. "I am going to count that as a very good sign," she added softly. Ethan's eyes fluttered again, slower this time, heavier, like he was trying to push through something invisible, and Lily leaned forward slightly, her posture attentive, encouraging. "Take your time," she whispered, her voice steady. "You do not have to rush." His gaze shifted, unfocused at first, then settling again, landing on her with more intention than before, not fully clear, but not lost either, and Lily felt her chest tighten with something deeper than relief, something closer to connection. "That is it," she said quietly, almost as if guiding him. "Stay with me." She watched closely, every small movement amplified, every second stretching longer than it should, and then his lips moved again, barely noticeable, a silent attempt that carried more effort than words ever should. Lily leaned closer, her breath held as she searched his expression, trying to understand what he was reaching for. "You are trying to say something," she murmured, her voice soft but certain. "It is okay. I am right here." She did not look away, not even for a second, because something in his eyes told her this mattered, this moment, this attempt. The monitor shifted again, the rhythm uneven for a brief second before settling, and Lily felt his fingers press faintly against hers, not as strong as before, but intentional, enough to anchor her there. "You do not have to force it," she whispered, her tone reassuring. "You have already come so far." But even as she said it, she could see the determination in his expression, subtle but real, like he was pushing against something only he could feel. Outside the room, footsteps passed by, distant voices echoed faintly down the hall, life continuing without pause. But inside, everything narrowed down to this single moment, this fragile effort to bridge the distance that had held him silent for so long. Lily swallowed, her eyes softening, her voice dropping to almost nothing. "If you cannot say it yet, you can show me," she said gently, her thumb brushing lightly across his hand. "I will understand." She held on to that belief, not because she had proof, but because she had seen enough to trust it. Ethan's gaze stayed on her for a moment longer, steadier now, more present than before, and though no sound came, no clear word formed, there was something unmistakable in that look, something aware, something choosing to stay, and Lily felt it settle in her chest with quiet certainty. This was no longer about waiting for him to wake up fully. This was about helping him find his way back, one moment, one breath, one unspoken word at a time. It happened late in the evening, when the hospital floor had quieted into that soft, almost sacred stillness where even footsteps felt distant and time seemed to slow, and Lily sat beside him again, the book open but forgotten in her lap, because now she did not need the story to reach him anymore. She only needed her voice. "You have been trying all day," she said gently, her tone warm with quiet encouragement, her fingers resting over his hand like they belonged there. "I can see it, you are closer than you think." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes steady on his, watching as they opened again, slower this time, but more certain, more aware, like he was no longer drifting in and out but choosing to stay. His gaze held on to her, not perfectly focused, not fully strong, but present in a way that made the room feel smaller, more intimate, as if everything outside of this moment had faded away. Lily swallowed softly, her heart beating just a little faster, not from fear, but from anticipation, the kind that builds quietly until it feels impossible to ignore. "You do not have to say everything," she whispered, her voice low and steady. "Just one word." She paused, her thumb brushing lightly against his hand, grounding both of them in the moment. "Start there." The silence stretched between them again, but it was no longer empty. It was full of effort, full of intention, and Lily could see it in the way his lips parted slightly, the way his breath shifted, uneven but deliberate. She leaned closer without realizing it, her face inches from his, her voice barely more than a breath. "I am right here," she said softly, her eyes never leaving his. "You are not alone." For a second nothing happened, The familiar pause threatening to return, but Lily did not pull back. She stayed, her presence steady, her belief unwavering, because she had come too far to doubt now. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, his lips moved again, forming something that did not quite become sound, a silent attempt that carried everything he had left, and Lily felt her breath catch as she watched, her heart tightening with a fragile hope that refused to break. "It is okay," she whispered, her voice trembling just slightly. "Try again." Her hand tightened gently around his, not urging, just holding, anchoring him there. The monitor shifted again, the rhythm quickening just enough to mark the moment, and Ethan's gaze locked onto hers with a clarity she had not seen before, not fully strong, not fully steady, but undeniable. And then it happened, quiet, almost lost in the hum of the room, but real, unmistakably real, a faint whisper that barely carried across the space between them. "Oi." The sound was fragile, broken by effort, but it was there, and for a second Lily did not move, did not breathe, her entire world narrowing down to that one moment, that one word, her name, spoken for the first time by someone who had been silent for so long it had seemed impossible. Her eyes widened, tears rising before she could stop them, her lips parting in disbelief as she shook her head slightly, like she needed to confirm it was real. "You said it," she breathed, her voice soft but filled with something deeper than joy, something steady and overwhelming all at once. "You said my name." She let out a quiet, unsteady laugh, her hand tightening around his as if she was afraid the moment might slip away. "I knew you could." Her voice softened again, almost a whisper now. "I never stopped believing." Ethan's eyes stayed on her, heavy with exhaustion but clearer than before, more present, and though he did not speak again, he did not need to, because the silence between them had already changed. It was no longer something that separated them. It was something they had just broken through together, one word, one breath, one impossible moment at a time. The days that followed no longer felt like waiting for something to happen. They felt like living inside something that had already begun, each moment carrying a quiet certainty that what had once seemed impossible had now taken root and would not disappear. Ethan did not speak much at first, his voice fragile, his words slow and measured, as if each one required more strength than he had expected, but he no longer needed to prove anything. Not to Lily, not to anyone, because the hardest part had already been done. He had found his way back. The room that once felt like a place of silence now held something warmer, something alive, the steady hum of machines no longer dominating the space but blending into the background of something more human, more real. Lily sat beside him as she always had, the book still in her hands, though now it rested closed more often than not, because the story had shifted. It was no longer about the pages she read, it was about the moments they shared between them. "You used to read to me every day," Ethan said one afternoon, his voice low but clear enough to carry across the small space between them, and Lily looked up, surprised not by the words themselves but by the way he said them, like he had been holding on to them for a long time. "I remember parts of it," he continued, his gaze steady on hers. "Not the story, but your voice." Lily felt her chest tighten slightly, a quiet emotion settling in as she held his gaze. "I was hoping you could hear me," she admitted softly, her fingers brushing lightly over the edge of the book. "I just did not know if it mattered." Ethan's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, subtle but real. "It did," he said simply, and in that moment, it felt like more than an answer. It felt like something being returned to her. The recovery was not instant, not perfect. There were still long days, therapy sessions, moments of exhaustion where progress felt slower than either of them wanted. But Lily stayed through all of it, not because she had to, not because it was part of her assignment, but because somewhere along the way, this had become something she chose. The city outside continued its rhythm, seasons shifting slowly, sunlight growing warmer as weeks passed. And one morning, for the first time since everything had changed, Ethan stood near the window, steady but careful, his reflection no longer distant but present, grounded. Lily stood a few steps behind him, watching quietly, her hands loosely clasped in front of her, giving him the space to take in the world he had returned to. And after a moment, he turned, his gaze finding hers with a clarity that no longer wavered. "You stayed," he said, his voice stronger now, not perfect, but certain, and Lily smiled softly, a quiet warmth in her expression. "You came back," she replied, her tone just as steady, just as sure. There was a pause then, not empty, not uncertain, but full, like everything that needed to be said had already been understood between them, and Ethan took a slow step closer, closing the space that had once felt so impossible to cross. His eyes held hers, calm, present, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, because they did not need to. The silence between them no longer something to overcome, but something that belonged to them, something that had shaped them. Lily glanced down briefly at the